We have several major developments in the 2026 Senate elections, where Republicans enter the cycle with a 4-seat cushion after flipping 4 seats last November. That leaves Democrats at a structural disadvantage, and the map doesn't do them any favors either. Of the 13 seats they're defending next November, 2 are in states Donald Trump carried in 2024, Michigan and Georgia. Another 5 Democratic-held seats are in states Kamala Harris carried by single-digit margins: Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Virginia, and New Mexico. On the flip side, Republicans are defending just 1 seat in a Harris-won state, Maine. And then North Carolina is the only other GOP-held seat in a Trump state that was decided by a single-digit margin. And that's where the week's biggest headline lands. Senator Thom Tillis has announced he will not seek re-election. Under increasing pressure from President Trump, particularly for voting against the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, Tillis is stepping away from Washington. This is unquestionably good news for Democrats, but we'll get to that later on. In today's video, I'm going to fill out the map with my latest predictions in each race, using a mix of recent election results, demographic trends, expert forecasts, and the latest polling we've got. Let's start with the obvious. Some seats are safely in each party's column. For Democrats, there's little reason to worry about Oregon, where incumbent Jeff Merkley is seeking a 4th term. Oregon voted for Harris by 14 points in 2024, saw one of the smallest shifts toward Trump nationally, and Merkley won his last 2 races by more than 15 points. There's no indication 2026 will be any different. I also expect John Hickenlooper to comfortably win re-election in Colorado, which he said will be his final term in the Senate. First elected in 2020 after 2 terms as governor, Hickenlooper will benefit from the fact that Colorado has shifted further to the left than any other state over the past decade. Over in Illinois, longtime Democratic Senator Dick Durbin has announced he won't seek a 6th term, setting off a scramble among several prominent Illinois Democrats eager to capitalize on a rare open seat. Right now, Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy is the polling favorite, though the polling we have thus far is by no means conclusive. Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton and Congresswoman Robin Kelly are both pulling in double digits. Ultimately, this one should remain safely in the Democratic column regardless of who's nominated. Republicans simply don't have a strong enough candidate to overcome the state's deep blue fundamentals. While Illinois is certainly trending right, Kamala Harris still carried it by 11 points last November, and 2026 is expected to be a more favorable environment for Democrats than 2024 was. Finally, in the Northeast, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, and Virginia are all safe Democratic holds, with incumbents expected to run for re-election in each state. New Jersey did trend significantly toward Trump in the 2024 presidential race, but it remains a fundamentally Democratic-leaning state, and incumbent Cory Booker remains very popular. And while Virginia was also decided by a single-digit margin in 2024, incumbent Mark Warner is signaling that he intends to run for a 4th term. In that case, the only factor that could make this race competitive is if outgoing Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin throws his hat into the ring. It'll be worth paying close attention to the margins in both Virginia and New Jersey's competitive governor races later this year, as they'll offer the first real test of Donald Trump's 2nd-term popularity at the state level. All right, now for the Republicans. There are so many deeply red states on this map, they're barely worth discussing individually. The only retirements we know of so far are Mitch McConnell in Kentucky and Tommy Tuberville in Alabama, who's running for governor, but that won't change much. Kentucky and Alabama remain 2 of the most reliably Republican states in the nation. All told, these 15 solid states bring the Republican total to 47 seats, already just 3 shy of the 50 needed to retain control of the Senate, assuming Vice President J.D. Vance holds the tie-breaking vote. There is an outside chance that the races in Alaska, Kansas, South Carolina, or Florida could grow more competitive, particularly if 2026 turns into a strong blue wave year. In Alaska, however, with former Democratic Congresswoman Mary Peltola now expected to run for governor instead of Senate, incumbent Republican Dan Sullivan appears to have a clear path to re-election. Similarly, in Kansas, outgoing Democratic Governor Laura Kelly has made it clear she is absolutely not running for another office, paving the way for Senator Roger Marshall to cruise to a second term. In South Carolina, Senator Lindsey Graham is also expected to face a smoother path than he did in 2020, when despite being out-fundraised by Democratic challenger Jamie Harrison, he still won by double digits. And in Florida, as long as newly appointed Senator Ashley Moody secures the GOP nomination, Republicans are in strong shape to hold the seat. Moody has overperformed in both of her statewide races for Attorney General and is widely seen as a formidable general election candidate. That leaves us with just 11 states still without a rating, each of which is either expected to be competitive or carries enough uncertainty that assigning a safe rating at this stage would simply be premature. Before we proceed, let me take this moment to remind you to subscribe to my channel below. It's completely free, and it helps me make more videos like these in the future. Right now, YouTube Analytics is telling me less than 20% of my viewers are subscribed. Again, just hit that button below, it's free. Thanks so much. Alrighty, let's start in New Mexico, one of the 5 Senate seats Democrats are defending in states Kamala Harris carried by single digits in 2024. The incumbent is Ben Ray Lujan, elected to his first term in 2020 with a 6-point win over Republican Mark Ronchetti, who was relatively unknown at the time. However, according to Split Ticket's wins above replacement score, Lujan underperformed expectations by over 5 points, suggesting he's not particularly strong as a candidate. That said, without a credible Republican challenger, this seat is very likely to remain in Democratic hands. Then there's Texas, where we've got more significant breaking news. Former Democratic Congressman and 2024 Senate nominee Colin Allred has officially launched his 2026 campaign, hoping to reverse his party's recent string of disappointments in a state that continues to defy Democratic momentum cycle after cycle. The Lone Star State saw the 6th largest Republican swing between 2020 and 2024, with Donald Trump expanding his margin from 5.5 points all the way up to 14. That shift effectively dashed any serious hopes Democrats had of unseating 4-term Republican Senator John Cornyn. But the dynamic has shifted now that Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton has officially launched a primary challenge against Cornyn, setting the stage for a high-stakes clash between the GOP establishment and its hardline conservative base. The two have long been at odds, with Paxton accusing Cornyn of being insufficiently conservative, while Cornyn has pointed repeatedly to Paxton's legal baggage, including his 2023 impeachment by the GOP-led Texas House. So far, neither Donald Trump nor Senator Ted Cruz has endorsed a candidate, with Trump's endorsement being considered critical in deciding the winner of the primary. Paxton has led Cornyn in every poll conducted so far, and usually by double digits, including the most recent survey via Pulse Decision Science that shows him above the runoff threshold with 57% to Cornyn's 38%. It's important to keep in mind here that Texas does hold runoff primary elections if no candidate receives more than 50% of the vote. Now, Cornyn does have a substantial war chest at his disposal and several endorsements from prominent U.S. senators. If he does survive the primary, he would likely win re-election comfortably, and Texas would stay in the safe Republican column. But if Paxton secures the nomination, the general election outlook will tighten significantly, especially with Colin Allred officially jumping into the race. Allred's candidacy is particularly notable given his strong performance in 2024, when he outpaced Kamala Harris in Texas by 5 points and came within 9 points of unseating Ted Cruz. The latest poll via YouGov and Texas Southern University shows Cornyn leading Allred by 4 points among 1,200 registered voters, while Paxton only leads Allred by 2. This is a pattern that goes for every other hypothetical Democratic opponent as well. For now, Texas remains in the likely Republican column, but if Paxton becomes the nominee, don't be surprised if I shift my rating to lean Republican. Up in Nebraska, Republican Pete Ricketts is running for his first full term in the Senate. He's not especially popular, even within his own party, and there's a real possibility that Dan Osborne could return as an independent candidate after coming within 7 points of defeating Deb Fischer last fall. Osborne proved himself a formidable fundraiser in 2024 and successfully positioned himself as neither a Democrat nor a Trump-aligned Republican. That allowed him to pull support from independents, soft Republicans, and Democrats alike. For now, this one stays in the likely Republican column, but an upset isn't out of the question if Osborne jumps in. Right next door in Iowa, Republican Senator Joni Ernst sparked controversy earlier this month during a town hall, prompting several Democrats to jump into the race, seeing an opening even in a state that's shifted sharply to the right over the past decade. Trump carried Iowa by 13 points in 2024, the largest margin for either party since Nixon's 49-state landslide in 1972. But Ernst's controversial comments, combined with the emerging candidacies of J.D. Scholten and State Senator Zach Walz, have led both the Cook Political Report and Sabato's Crystal Ball to move the race into the likely Republican column. I'm inclined to follow their lead, placing Iowa alongside Nebraska and Texas in that same likely Republican tier. And with that, Republicans are now up to 50 Senate seats, enough to retain their majority with Vice President J.D. Vance holding the tie-breaking vote. Next is Minnesota, where Democrat Tina Smith has announced she won't seek a second full term, making this the first U.S. Senate race in the state without an incumbent since 2006. That also happens to be the last time Republicans won a federal election in Minnesota. Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan currently holds the early edge in the Democratic primary, with Congresswoman Angie Craig seen as the next most likely contender. On the Republican side, the most prominent name in the race so far is former NBA player Royce White, but he just lost to Senator Amy Klobuchar by 16 points last November. Unless the GOP manages to recruit a significantly stronger candidate, Flanagan, or whoever emerges as the Democratic nominee, should be favored to win comfortably. Shifting across the Great Lakes, let's head to Michigan, where Democrat Gary Peters is also stepping down. This one poses more of a challenge for Democrats, given that they narrowly lost Michigan in the 2024 presidential race. While Democrat Alyssa Slotkin managed to narrowly win the state's open Senate seat last cycle, she did so by just 20,000 votes over former Republican Congressman Mike Rogers, who has now officially entered the 2026 race again. On the Democratic side, with both Pete Buttigieg and outgoing Governor Gretchen Whitmer declining to run, the party lacks a clear top-tier name. Congresswoman Haley Stevens is currently the frontrunner among declared candidates, with State Senator Mallory McMorrow close behind. Stevens has slightly outperformed fundamentals in her last 3 House races by about 1 or 2 points, but nothing especially notable. So as long as Republicans avoid a major misstep like nominating Tudor Dixon again, Rogers will have a solid shot at flipping this seat. For now, I'm placing Michigan in the tilt Democrat column though, considering the fundamentals should favor Democrats in 2026. The party also has a well-established track record of winning down ballot races here over the last decade. Down in Ohio, we're looking at a special election to fill the remainder of the Senate term vacated by Vice President J.D. Vance. Republican Governor Mike DeWine appointed Lieutenant Governor John Husted to the seat, and Husted is now running as an unelected incumbent. On the Democratic side, former Senator Sherrod Brown is reportedly eyeing a run for governor, which could put him on a collision course with another prominent Democrat, former Congressman Tim Ryan, who has also expressed interest in the governor's race. Brown and Ryan are by far the Democrats' strongest contenders, so the fact that neither may enter the Senate race is welcome news for Republicans. Husted, meanwhile, is expected to be a strong candidate in his own right with considerable statewide experience, having previously served as Secretary of State. Without Brown or Ryan in the race, this would be a safe Republican hold, but as long as there's still a chance Sherrod Brown jumps in, this race stays in the likely Republican column, for now. Let's head up to New England now, where we have two uniquely interesting contests. In New Hampshire, Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen is retiring, and Congressman Chris Pappas is the first to enter the race to succeed her. At this point, he's likely to remain the most prominent Democrat in the field. Unfortunately for Republicans, former Governor Chris Sununu decided against running. He would have been their strongest possible contender by far. Instead, it now looks like former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown will likely win the GOP nomination. Brown's a strong candidate in his own right, and in a red wave year, he might even be favored over Pappas. But New Hampshire leans blue on fundamentals, and 2026 is shaping up to be a favorable cycle for Democrats. So I've got this race in the lean Democratic column for now. Up in Maine, Republican Senator Susan Collins is a political unicorn. Back in 2020, nearly every poll and analyst predicted her defeat, yet she beat Democrat Sarah Gideon by 8 points, even as Joe Biden carried Maine by 9. To this day, she remains the only Republican to win a Senate race in a state simultaneously carried by a Democratic presidential nominee since 2004. Looking ahead to 2026, Maine is the only Republican-held seat in a state that Kamala Harris won, and it's widely considered Democrats' top pickup opportunity. Their best possible challenger would have been Congressman Jared Golden, but he has declined. If Golden did run, Democrats would probably have been favorites, but without him, their most established option is outgoing Governor Janet Mills, who doesn't necessarily boast awe-inspiring approval numbers. If Democrats can at least persuade Mills to run, this could end up being a generational fumble. Maine's D+4 partisan lean suggests that in a neutral national environment, a generic Democrat should beat a generic Republican here by around 8 points. While Susan Collins has proven she can overperform expectations by that margin in the past, it's more likely than not that the national environment in 2026 will lean Democratic, which would further advantage any reasonably strong Democratic nominee. But as of now, without a credible challenger in the race, I have to give Collins the edge. All right, let's wrap things up along the Atlantic coastline with the two highest-profile Senate races of the 2026 cycle, North Carolina and Georgia. There's a good chance that when we look back on this election, these two contests will define which party enters 2028 with momentum. In North Carolina, Republican Senator Thom Tillis has announced he won't seek a third term. His departure wasn't entirely unexpected. Tillis had long faced criticism from the right, censured by the state GOP back in 2023 for his bipartisan support on immigration, gun control, and same-sex marriage. But what seems to have sealed it was his recent vote against President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill that effectively ended his already shaky standing within the MAGA wing of the party. Now, with Tillis out, the Republican primary field is wide open. Early reporting suggests that former RNC co-chair and Trump's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, is seriously considering a run, and she's widely seen as having the right of first refusal. Her nomination, however, would be a disaster for Republicans. That's not hyperbole. It's an objective political reality, especially with former Governor Roy Cooper increasingly likely to enter the race on the Democratic side. Cooper would immediately become the strongest non-incumbent candidate in the country. He left office with high approval ratings, near universal name recognition across the state, and a powerful fundraising network already in place. Cooper would have at least had a 50-50 shot even against an incumbent like Tillis. But in an open seat race, he starts out as the clear favorite, particularly if Lara Trump is the nominee, in which case this race could shift as far left as lean Democrats. For now, I'm placing it in the tilt Democrat column, pending the outcome of the Republican primary. Finally, in Georgia, outgoing Governor Brian Kemp's decision not to run for Senate was, at the time, the worst news Republicans received all cycle. Kemp, much like Roy Cooper in North Carolina, is a popular, battle-tested leader in a politically competitive state. He would have been the strongest possible Republican to challenge Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff, and might even have been favored to flip the seat, despite Ossoff's considerable strengths as a candidate. Ossoff made history in 2020 by defeating incumbent David Perdue in a high-stakes runoff. and has since built a formidable political brand and fundraising machine. Without Kemp, Republicans lack a clear top-tier alternative. Congressman Buddy Carter is the most prominent name to enter the race so far, with another potential contender in Congressman Mike Collins reportedly inching toward a bid. But neither candidate is particularly well-positioned to compete at the scale this race demands. It's also important to note that while much of the country swung sharply to the right between 2020 and 2024, Georgia and North Carolina did not. Both states are experiencing gradual demographic shifts that continue to benefit Democrats, expanding, diversifying metro areas, and a steady influx of college-educated transplants from traditionally blue regions in the Northeast and West. Put it all together, and Jon Ossoff now holds a clear edge in what was once shaping up to be the GOP's best flip opportunity of the cycle. So with all that said, we land at a projected 52 to 48 Republican majority, with Democrats gaining 2 seats. While their path to a majority remains narrow, it still exists. Most likely it would require flipping Maine, currently rated as tilt Republican, and then taking 2 of the following likely Republican seats: Ohio, Iowa, Nebraska, and/or Texas. That's just my current read based on where the national environment and candidate dynamics stand today. But of course, it's still early. The map can and will shift. Feel free to share your thoughts on the map in the comments below and let me know what topics or races you'd like me to cover next. That's it for today's video. Huge thanks to my channel members, all listed in the description. Don't forget to hit subscribe and drop a like if you enjoyed the content. Check out more videos here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.